great. So it looks like everyone here is a student. Perfect, great. All right, so let me share my screen and we will get started, and I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions. You can feel free to put things in the chat as you think of them, or you can save them and I'll have time for you to raise your hand and you can just unmute because that usually works easiest. I don't have anyone on my team with me here this evening. I'm by myself, so bear with me while I make sure I let everybody in from the waiting room. All right, so let's get started. Can someone just confirm with me that you can see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So as I mentioned, we are going to go through the CNS pathway today. This presentation is specifically for University of Western State students and alumni. I'm recording this in case anybody needs to watch it later who's not able to join us in person. So as I mentioned, my name is Amy Smith. I'm the Senior Director of Certifications and Advocacy at the ANA and the BCNS. So I am the person that you work with the entire process of getting your CNS. So from the time that you graduate and you're getting ready to sit for the exam all the way through until you get your CNS and then you recertify. So I'm there through the whole process. So this is a great opportunity for me to get to know the students and for you to ask me questions. So please don't hesitate to ask questions as they come up. Here's just a quick agenda. We're going to do an overview of the ANA. We're going to talk about the benefits of the CNS and go through the steps of the CNS pathway, a little bit about advocacy, and we'll save plenty of time for questions. I am fighting a little bit of a cold, so bear with me. I'm sorry. Hopefully I can make it through with no issues. All right, so at the ANA, or the American Nutrition Association, we focus on 4 pillars. The first pillar is educate. So we do this in a couple of different ways. We have a continued education content membership. We also have a student membership, and that grants access to all of our handouts and all of our webinars. So we release 2 new webinars a month. Those are usually based on a theme. So for example, this month's theme is GI. So the webinars and the handouts that we have as part of that membership are based on GI. So we have a nutrient of the month, which is a great handout that we have in there that you can share with your clients. And so there's wonderful resources in that membership. We also have ANA trainings. So we have a training on ketogenic nutrition. We have a training on nutrigenomics. We have a new integrating nutrition into practice training, which we have made for physicians and other people that already have nutrition in their scope of practice. So we educate through those different means. We certify, which is my main role at ANA. So we have the CNS, which is what we're here to talk about today, the Certified Nutrition Specialist. We also have the CKNS, which is the Certified Ketogenic Nutrition Specialist, the CNGS, which is the Certified Nutrigenomics Specialist, and the CPNP, which is the Certified Personalized Nutrition practitioner. So those last 3 are earned through completing a training through the ANA and then getting the certification. The third pillar is advocacy. So at the ANA, we believe that all nutrition professionals should be able to practice to their level of training and expertise, and that includes everyone. So we feel like there's room at the table for CNSs, for RDs, for health coaches, for NDs, everyone, there's a place for everyone. And so when we're advocating for practice rights for our practitioners, we keep that in mind. So we always ensure that there's proper exemptions in place, or that different avenues are covered so that everyone has the ability to practice to their level of training. And then the fourth pillar is that we connect. So we have a program called CNS Connect, which is really focused on connecting CNSs with each other and also bridging the gap that we see from graduation into when we start practice. So, when you graduate and you get your CNS and all of a sudden you're in the middle of being an entrepreneur and also being a nutritionist, there's kind of, a gap there. So we have a lot of resources in that area. We provide CNS candidate support. So this webinar is a good example of that. I also do a CNS candidate office hours every other month. We have a CNS candidate Facebook group, which I can put the link in the chat. We have the membership that I mentioned, which also has a student aspect. And then we do different networking and events so that you can connect with each other. So let's talk about the CNS. First, let's talk about the benefits of getting the CNS. So the CNS is a certification, and the certification signifies that an individual possesses the knowledge and skills required to perform a certain set of competencies. So in this case, the competencies that the BCNS is set out as those competencies in personalized nutrition and medical nutrition therapy. A certification sets the standard for a given discipline. So the CNS is the only certification that focuses on personalized nutrition. And then it does focus on MNT, which would be similar to
Those are
to
add-ons
RD.
to your CNS.
If everyone doesn't care to mute, that would be, here, I'll just mute everyone. That way we don't have any issues. Okay. The CNS itself is accredited, which is done by the National Commission of Certifying Agencies. So essentially the NCCA certifies certifications, and they have a very rigorous standard process that you have to meet in order to ensure that your certification meets those requirements. And so the CNS certification is NCCA accredited. And those benefits of that accreditation show stakeholders that it is regulated, it's trusted, there's third-party verification. As part of that, our exam has to have psychometric validation, and then it also supports certificates in the profession when we're trying to get state licensure. So that NCCA accreditation is extremely important to us. As a CNS, there's several different career paths you can take. So the first one being private practice, which I see a lot of CNSs going into, but we're seeing more and more CNSs in integrative clinics and even in hospital settings, which maybe wasn't the case even 5 years ago. We're seeing a lot more CNSs working in that collaborative care environment. You can also go into writing, blogging, and podcasting. We have CNSs that are working in academia and research. We have several CNSs that sit on licensing boards or work in nonprofits, CNSs that work in the research, especially within the supplement companies. And then we see several CNSs working in community nutrition, culinary nutrition, and really moving from not just one-on-one practice to now doing a lot of group programs and those type of offerings as opposed to just one-on-one sessions. All right, so the CNS pathway has 3 E's: education, exam, and experience. So we're going to go through each of those in detail, and I'll have time for questions after each piece just to make sure that we don't miss anybody's questions. Okay. So the first piece is the education requirement. So there's 2 parts to that. First is the degree requirement. So we require that someone have a master's degree in nutrition. But in addition to that, we have certain coursework requirements that you have to sit for the exam, and we'll go through those. Our exam, which is the second E, is a 200 multiple choice question exam. You get 4 hours to take it. It is taken at a test center. We offer it twice a year, in the summer and in the winter. So it's usually June and December. So our next exam is June 8th through the 12th, and the application process for that has already ended. So applications were due on the 14th. So just know that when you're getting ready to apply for the exam, applications are usually due about 60 days before that exam period. And then the third E is experience. So all CNSs have 1,000 hours of supervised practice experience that is done underneath a BCNS approved supervisor. So we'll go into each of these in detail. So first, the degree requirement. So everyone has to have a master's of science in a field of nutrition. So anyone that's enrolled in the nutrition program at University of Western States upon graduation will meet that degree requirement. We do also accept doctoral degrees, and we do also accept foreign degrees that as long as they have an equivalency, so we can tell what the US equivalency would be. On top of that degree requirement, we have coursework requirements. So we require 36 semester credit hours of coursework, and this is in foundational knowledge that we relate directly to those core competencies that a CNS practices. And so we'll go into all of those courses in just a second and exactly where your coursework at University of Western States fits into each of those categories. Okay, so for the first one, we have graduate level nutrition. So this is the only category that has to be graduate level. We do not accept undergraduate level, and you have to have 12 credits. So at University of Western States, it's a quarter credit system. So in order to get semester credits, you have to do a little bit of math. And so all of the totals that you have on your transcript or when you are getting your grades are in quarter credits. We divide that by 1.5 and that equals semester credits. So I've already done the math here so you can kind of see what the coursework is going to look like. Also, at University of Western States, we split some of the courses up into different categories. So you might notice, for example, that one course might only be worth 0.66 of a credit. That's because we're using the rest of that course in a different category. So you'll kind of see how that plays out here. But we're just starting with the nutrition, the nutrition category first. So all the courses listed here will go towards that requirement. So principles of functional medicine, evidence-based nutrition, sports nutrition, and exercise metabolism. All of these are going to count towards that first category of nutrition graduate level courses. And this equals 12. So we've already done the math for you, and I have a copy of this breakdown that I'll put in the chat too, so everybody will have a link to it. The second category is biochemistry. So this can be graduate or undergraduate level, and you have to have 6 credits. So the courses here, as you'll see, some of the courses were in the first category as well, but we've broken them down and separated them to ensure that we're not double dipping. So you can't count a course in both categories, but we can count part of a course in more than one category. So for example, evidence-based nutrition here, we're counting 0.66 of a credit. So if you have all of these courses, you'll easily meet the 6 credit requirement for the biochemistry. We require 3 credits of anatomy and physiology. So this is a prerequisite to the program. So most of you hopefully took it already before you were enrolled in the program and already have that. So just make sure when you're applying for the exam, you indicate where you took that. We do accept those courses as undergraduate courses. University of Western States does have an articulation agreement with Straighter Line. So I know a lot of people use Straighter Line as an option for that prerequisite, which is fine as long as the university you're attending has an articulation agreement so that that course shows up on the transcript, which University of Western States has. So you can count that course. I know a lot of people also use Portage or Geneva. All of those things are fine. But if it doesn't show up on your University of Western States transcript, we'll have to have a transcript from that school. So most people already have that done hopefully before they've been enrolled in the program. The next category is clinical and life sciences. So again, this can be graduate or undergraduate, and we require 12 credits. So here's another breakdown of what we accept from the different courses that are in your program. And again, it equals 12, so the math works out perfectly. And again, you'll see some of the courses are overlapped from other categories, but we've broken it down to ensure it covers all of the things that you're required to have. And this could also include anything you have from your undergraduate degree. So if you took a biology class or inorganic chemistry, any of those type of science classes can be counted in this category as well. So most people have well over the 12 credits without any issue. And then the last category is behavioral science. So we require 3 credits in this category. So there are a couple of courses listed here that University of Western States offers. I don't think all of them are required within the degree. Meal planning and health and wellness is. I think the other 2 are electives. But these are classes that we would accept for that category. We also would accept any undergraduate work that is related to behavioral science. So that could be an intro to psychology. It could be an intro to sociology, motivational interviewing. Any of those type of courses would also count in this category. Jennifer said she thought she took intro to biochem as a prerequisite as well. Yes, absolutely. If you took a biochemistry course, again, with your undergraduate degree or at Straighter Line or something like that, absolutely it can count. Just make sure it shows up on that transcript when you go to apply for your exam. All right. So when you're applying for the exam, the first step is the degree. So you have to have graduated. And then the second step is the courses. So you're going to show us when you apply for the exam that you have all of those coursework requirements. So most of them are going to be met through your program, no problem. There's just a couple of holes you're going to have to fill in, that anatomy and physiology and the behavioral science. You'll make sure you put those pieces in. Elizabeth's asking, does nutrition practice strategies, which covers motivational interviewing, count towards psych portion? Yes, I would say absolutely. Yeah. Anything that is about communication, that's that kind of learning to communicate, health coaching courses also count. So anything that's that learning how to coach and communicate will count in that category. Okay, so you have the coursework requirements, you have the degree requirement, you can apply for the exam. As I mentioned before, the application period is usually about 60 days before the exam period. The exam period itself lasts 5 days. So when you register, you'll have within that 5-day window, you'll be able to go take the exam at a test center in your location. Most places in the US have a test center at least within an hour or so. If you live outside of the US, no problem. We have test centers available in most countries, but if you live in a country that doesn't have a test center, no problem. Just let us know. We can make sure that we work with you. So don't worry if you live in a place that you don't think a test center would be around. So the documents required to apply for the exam, you have to have the coursework form, which is available in the candidate portal, which you'll become familiar with because that's the portal that you will submit everything in. You will have to submit your transcripts. So we'll need a transcript from University of Western States, and we'll need transcripts from any of the other schools that you used for your prerequisites. And you'll have those emailed directly from the school to applications at nutritionspecialist.org. And then 2 letters of recommendation. So those are going to have to be from someone that you've worked with in a professional capacity. So it could be a professor, could be a supervisor, could be a boss. So those are going to come directly from the writer to applications at nutritionspecialist.org. And then you'll have a resume that you're going to upload to the candidate portal. Don't worry if it doesn't have to be flashy. We're just looking for a real basic resume. It is $100 to apply for the fee. To apply for the exam. That's paid when you submit the application. Upon approval of your application, there is a $400 fee. And then there is a separate fee that you pay to the test center when you register, which is $83. Let me look at the questions in the chat here. What about if you have a certification as a certified health coach? Would that count as behavioral credit hours? If it's from a university, yes, you have to have 3 credit hours from a university in behavioral science. So it really depends on if the certification was done, and even if they offered continuing education credits, that wouldn't work. It would need to be from a university program. If I have a health coaching certification from IIN, does that count? So same thing there. It has to be from a university and it has to be credit hours. So if you've taken a certification outside of that, it wouldn't count for those credits. All right. So before we talk about the supervised practice experience, is there any other questions about the exam or logistics of the exam? And please feel free to raise your hand if you don't want to type it in. Hello, Amy, I'm a Canadian student at the University of Western States. Is there an ANA equivalent in Canada? No, there is not, but we do have several CNSs in Canada. So Tessa, I'll put my email in the chat at the end. If you want to reach out to me, I can put you in touch with them and they can kind of advise on what they did. But we absolutely have CNSs in Canada who are practicing, and they were able to get their supervision and everything with no issue. So let me know and I can send you a couple of contacts that you can reach out to find out what they're doing exactly. Whitney, go ahead and unmute yourself and let me know your question.
Hi, I was just wondering if for any of the courses required to apply, if there's a time limit, like if our undergraduate degree was a long time ago or whatever.
Great question. Yeah,
Yep.
there is not. No.
Okay.
There is no time limit. So as long as you can get us a transcript, it doesn't matter when you took it, we'll accept it. No problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Can the letters of recommendation be from anyone you've worked with or practitioners or professors? So it needs to be in a professional capacity. So it wouldn't be a client or it wouldn't be your friend that you worked with at a job. It needs to be a supervisor, a professor, someone that in that kind of professional role. If you already work in a clinic and someone from that clinic can write you a letter of recommendation, that would be fine. It just needs to be in a professional relationship and it can't be like a client. All right. Okay. Any other exam questions before we move on? Oh, what is the time limit for letters versus applying? As long as we have the letters of recommendation by the application date, there's no time limit. And really you can submit those as soon as you start the process. So, you know, whenever you have them is absolutely fine. Would community college or technical college count for the psych credit? So credits from any school will count as long as that school is regionally or institutionally accredited. So it used to be called regional accreditation. In the last couple of years, the language on that has changed, and now it's called institutional accreditation. So as long as that they have that accreditation, we'll accept their credits. If you're unsure if your school meets that, there's a website called CHEA, CHEA, and you can go to that website and type your school's name in, and it will tell you if it's accredited. As long as it's accredited, we'll accept it. How do you go about study materials for the exam? So we do have some study materials listed on the website. So let me, while we're answering this, let me just bring those up. There is some study materials on the website. There are some great study courses that some CNSs offer. Also, some of the supervision programs offer different offer exam prep with their programs. So as you know, when you're graduating, you're starting to think about who you're going to have as your supervisor. That's something you can definitely ask them. Do they offer exam prep? But let me get the link to this, how to prepare for the exam, and I'll throw that in the chat so everybody has it. And I will also put in a link to the exam content outline. So this is going to be what is on the exam. So we just updated this for the next 5 years. So let me throw that in the chat so everybody has that. Okay. How long in advance can we start a test application? Really, you can start the process as soon as you graduate, because we have to have that final transcript to really get you going in the process. So if you're close to graduation now and you graduate before October 15th, you could take the December exam. If not, you'll be, you know, set up for 2024 or 2025. But as soon as you graduate, you can start the process. Is the test taken after or before work experience? Great question. So you can take the exam upon graduation. You do not have to have your 1,000 hours complete, but the exam is a clinical exam. So we do see people do better on the exam if they have at least part of their hours complete, but that's absolutely up to you. I know some people want to just take the exam and get it over with while they still have all the knowledge from their program in their head, and that's totally fine. Just know that it is clinical. So when I say it is clinical, what I mean is the questions are going to be things like a client presents with these symptoms and these lab markers. And those two things together might indicate a deficiency in what vitamin, and what would you recommend to them. So it's very, the whole exam's not that way, but it's very clinical based. I do have I have some example questions too. So let me throw those in the chat as well. Okay, let's see. What are the 2 dates of the CNS exam again? So they're always in June and December. So usually the first or second week of each of those months based on when you're going to take it. And usually the application itself is due 60 days ahead of time. Is it okay to be with 2 different supervisors at different times? Yes, we're going to talk about supervision in just a second, but absolutely. Okay, let me throw 2 things in the chat before we move on here. I'm going to put in the example questions. So these are 10 example questions that are from the exam themselves. And then I'm going to put in the example application for the university. So you'll have that, so you'll know exactly where everything fits into those different categories that we just talked about. Do we have practice exams? We do not, but a lot of those on that link that I put in the chat before about study materials, there's practice exams on there. And there's also several study groups that offer practice exams. Can we get a copy of the slides? Absolutely. I'll send them over to Dr. Redwood and Dr. Brown with the recordings to make sure everybody can get them. How many questions do you need to answer correctly to pass? Great question. So our exam is scored after the fact. So it usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get your results. The reason it takes so long is because we run psychometrics on the exam after it happens, which actually benefits the test taker. So we look at, we look at the questions and see, did, 80% of the people get a question wrong. Why did they get it wrong? Was it written poorly? Was the answer incorrect? And so we're evaluating every single test every time it's taken just to determine that score. So we do that after the fact, after we see how everyone's done on the exam to ensure that it's fair. Usually, the last couple of exams, the cut score was 113 out of 200. So really, that's a pretty low score. It's about a 59, I think, if I remember correctly. So you don't have, you don't need us, 80% or higher to pass this exam. It's, it's usually that cut score is around 113 to 120-ish, depending on which exam you're taking. Alexis, go ahead. Why don't you unmute yourself and I'll take the next one.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. So you said that we can take the exam. I'm sorry, my son just started crying. You said we can take the exam before we have our 1,000 hours, but do we actually get the CNS accreditation before that too, or is it held for us until we prove that we have the hours?
Exactly that. Yeah. So if you pass the exam, we hold on to your exam score. You finish your hours. You turn in that tracker, which we're going to talk through in just a second. Once I have both of those items, that's when you get your actual CNS. But you can take them. Some people take more time with the hours, so they go and get the exam done, and then when they finish their hours, we have all that information and then issue the CNS.
Once we do turn in the hours, how long is the turnaround period to actually have the credentialing?
Usually less than 2 weeks.
Depending
on my schedule. I usually approve people on Fridays, so it's not a long process. So usually at most 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That would be on a bad week. If I was on vacation or something, it might take an extra week, but it's pretty quick.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's see. How many times can you take the exam? So you can take the exam as many times as you need to. And you can take it the next period. So if you fail the exam in June, you could take it again in December. There is a re-exam fee of $200. You don't have to pay, you don't have to pay all the fees again. But there's a re-exam fee. You can take it as many times as you need to, but usually I see people think, oh, I'll go ahead and take it just to see how I do, and then I'll retake it and they pass. So go in with the mindset that you'll only have to take it once, but you can take it as many times as you need to. Okay, I'm just going to make sure I didn't miss any questions. If you graduate this December, can you take the exam then too? No. So we would have to have your final transcript by December 1st. And so usually that can't happen. If I'm not sure when graduation is, but I would say that it's probably after December 1st. So you would have to wait to take that June exam. We used to have Jennifer asked, I heard you can only take it once per calendar year. We used to have that rule. We actually got rid of that. And we're able to do that because we offer a different exam each time now, where we didn't used to have enough questions in the bank to do that. So now we're able to offer a different exam each 6 months. So you can take it again in the same calendar year. That's absolutely fine. All right. Okay, I'm going to move on, but keep throwing your questions in the chat. All right, so let's move on to the supervised practice experience. So the supervised practice experience includes 1,000 hours. They're going to be in 3 categories, A, B, and C, which we'll go through in detail. You have to have a 200-hour minimum in each of those categories, and then the other 400 hours can be in any of the categories. Time with your supervisor absolutely counts. It doesn't fit into one of those categories, but it counts towards your hours. So some of those extra 400 hours will be the time that you spend with your supervisor. And you'll have to use the approved BCNS tracker to track your hours. So we'll take a peek at that in just a second. The goals of the SPE are to address the competencies, and I'll show you on this tracker where the competencies are, so you'll know what I'm talking about when I say that. It's set up so it's meant to be flexible to meet your career goals, so there's no time limit. Now, there is one time limit. If you pass the exam, you have 5 years to finish your hours. That's the only time restraint that we have. But as far as like, you know, a minimum of trying to finish in 9 months or a year, we don't have any requirements like that. And then we have developed the tracker to ensure that it meets state licensing regulations and guidelines. So if you're in a state, for example, like North Carolina, who requires you to turn in the tracker and to account for every hour in those 1,000 hours, we've ensured that our tracker aligns with those requirements. You can start your hours as soon as you're matriculated into your program. So if you're a student now, you can start your hours, but you're going to want to make sure you start with your indirect hours, which we'll talk about in just a second, before you get into your direct hours, especially if you haven't finished your foundational nutrition courses. So most of the supervision programs that I know of allow students to enter into them in their last semester or last trimester of their program. If you want to start earning hours before you graduate, absolutely fine. One of the questions is, if you do a supervised mentorship in the University of Western States program, do those hours count towards supervised practice hours? I'm going to say yes, but check with Dr. Brown. They were in, they're in the works of getting all of that figured out. So there are hours offered, as far as I understand, that are supervised through the program. And so those will need to be tracked on the tracker, and yes, they can absolutely count. You can have multiple venues and supervisors during your supervision, so don't feel like you have to stick with the same supervisor the whole time. A lot of the supervision programs out there have multiple supervisors. So I know Clinicians Incubator, Nutrition and Herbal Collective are two larger ones. They have 7 to 10 supervisors within their program, which is great because you're going to get input from several different places. But if you choose to work with an individual supervisor, that's absolutely fine as well. But you might want to, may want to work with more than one single supervisor. Are there different supervised hours for different states? So the rule with the states, there's not different supervised hours. You'll just want to make sure that depending on your state, if your state requires a license, then your supervisor has to be licensed in that state. So for example, if you live in Florida, Florida requires a license to practice medical nutrition therapy. So if you live in Florida and you're seeing clients in Florida as part of your supervision, your supervisor needs to be licensed in Florida. They don't have to live there, but they have to be licensed. So when you're looking for a supervisor, knowing that is really important. If you're unsure of your state laws, then reach out to me and we can go through that. And if we have some time at the end, we can answer any state specific questions. But you want to make sure that you're following the state guidelines. If you're doing telehealth, you have to follow the guidelines in your state where you're located and where your client is located. So for example, I'm in Virginia, but if I'm working with a client in Maryland, Maryland requires a license. I would have to have a license there. So when you're under supervision, you're technically working under your supervisor's license, but those state nuances come into effect there. But all states, no matter where you're at, you're going to track your hours the same way. Some states just require that you turn in the tracker, while other states don't require it. So you won't track them any differently. What you turn in at the end when you go to get your license will be different. Okay. I'm going to talk about the best way to find a supervisor. Can the supervisor write the letter of recommendation? Absolutely. And most of the supervision programs do that as part of their program. They'll have 2 people from that program write your letters of recommendation. They can even come from the same program as long as it's 2 different people. Okay, so let me get into a little bit more detail about the hours, and then I will go back to any questions that I missed. So there's 2 different types of hours, direct and indirect. Direct hours, you have to have at least 750. Direct hours occur as the candidate becomes more experienced, and more of the hours will be spent directly with a client or group of clients or in preparation for client work. So direct experience is you working directly with a client that is your client. It's not your supervisor's client. It's not your professor's client. It's not a case study. It's your client. So 750 hours need to be done with you working directly with clients. Examples of this might be counseling one-on-one or in groups. It's going to be any of the activities related to that client. So if you're doing chart notes, if you're creating a treatment plan, if you're writing their protocol, you're researching their medications, anything that has to do with that client counts for hours. It's not just the time you're spending one-on-one with them. It's all the other things that come with that as well. Participating in community education, including the development and delivery of education to a specific population count. So what is this? This would be like doing a presentation at the local senior citizen center on hypertension. So you're doing an education activity to a community of a certain population. Supervisor-led grand rounds. So if you're not familiar with what grand rounds are, that's usually when people come together and talk about cases. So a lot of the supervision programs have cohorts, and 4 or 5 people are getting together and talking about cases. That's called grand rounds. Also, any one-on-one meetings that you're having, talking to your supervisor about your clients, those count for direct hours. So the opposite of direct hours are indirect hours. There is a maximum of 250 hours in this category, but you do not have to have any hours as indirect. That's absolutely up to you. If you are someone who already has a practice, who already works as a clinician, maybe you don't need indirect hours because you already have that experience. It really just depends on your comfort level and your specific background. But the maximum you can get is 250 hours. So this is a planned learning situation that is not direct client care. It does not require intervention by the candidate. And so it might be you listening to videos of your supervisor. It might be doing case studies. It might be shadowing a clinician. It might be watching your supervisor do a session and then you taking chart notes or making a mock protocol. So this is you earning hours, not working with clients, but you're still working on a case. So this is usually, like I said, case studies and those type of things. So those are, like I said, maximum 250 of the 1,000 hours will be indirect. The following activities do not qualify for SPE. Research for the sake of researching. So if you're researching a client case, so you have a client who's come to you and they have something you've never heard of, their health condition is something you're unfamiliar with, and you have to research that, great, that counts for hours. Or you need to research their medications, or you need to research the grocery store they shop at. All of those things count for hours, but research just for the sake of researching. So I'm just going to make a handout about sleep because one day I might need it. That's a great way to study for the exam, but it's not going to count for hours because it doesn't relate directly to the client that you're working with. Writing books, articles, and blogs does not count. Teaching classes in academia does not count. So if you're a professor at a program, that wouldn't count for hours. Developing condition-based training programs and treatment protocols that are not related to our current client wouldn't count. So this is kind of like the making a handout about sleep. Say you wanted to make a program about Hashimoto's. Great, that might help you in the future, but it's not, if it's not about your current clients today, then it wouldn't count for hours. Presenting educational lectures or videos or webinars to a mass audience. So this includes things like Facebook Lives. So it's great if you're doing educational materials, but if it's open to a mass audience, that doesn't count for hours. A great way to get clients though, but it wouldn't count for hours. And then watching any kind of educational lectures, videos, and webinars would not count for hours. Should my supervisor overlook all of my clients to be counted towards direct hours? Yes, your supervisor needs to oversee everything, even the indirect hours, but every client you have that counts for direct hours, you need to discuss with your supervisor. The level of which you discuss with them or how often you meet with them is at the discretion of your supervisor. So in the beginning, when you're first starting, it might be weekly. And then as you get closer to your 1,000 hours, maybe you meet bi-weekly or once a month. But all cases need to be discussed with your supervisor, because essentially you're working under their license and that client is technically their responsibility. So you need to be talking to them about all cases. And indirect hours you can talk to them about as well. For example, if you're making a mock protocol from one of their client recordings, you would want to go over that with them also. If your state does not require licensure, can you acquire a license in another state? Yes. If you, for example, I'm in Virginia and we don't have licensure in Virginia, we have title protection, but no licensure, but I have a license in Maryland, Illinois, and Delaware. So you can absolutely apply for licensure in other states. The benefit to that, especially if you live in a state that doesn't have a license, is that if you decide to take insurance, then you would have to have a license in a state. So for example, I paneled with insurance in Maryland. That's why I got a license there. So you can absolutely apply for licenses in other states, especially if you want to do telehealth. Okay. So let's talk about the categories, and I'll show you all the tracker here in just a minute too. So category A is assessment and interpretation. So think A, assessment. So this is essentially those first initial consultations. It could be any time that you're assessing. So if you're doing a discovery call to decide if they're going to be a good client for you, you're assessing that. That counts for category A. Any of the time that you're spending preparing for your first session with them. So you're looking up their health conditions, you're looking up their medications, you're looking at their forms, category A. That first initial intake with them, whether it's 60 minutes, 90 minutes, however long you're going to do your initial intakes for, that counts in category A. So just think of anything as assessment. And so this might be, you know, like I said, looking at their lab markers, looking at their family history, their health history, you're assessing. So this is that first initial assessment. Category B is going to be intervention, education, counseling, and ongoing care. So I'm not going to read all the words on the slide. I'll send it over so you guys can all read it later. But initially, this is essentially going to be you creating their protocol, creating any education around the protocol. So maybe it's a diet plan. Maybe it's a handout about sleep. Maybe it is setting up a grocery store tour for them. So anything that's around educating them and the treatment plan is going to be category B. The other thing that counts in category B is education. So if you're doing group programs, so you're doing that presentation about hypertension at the Senior Citizen Center, that's going to count for category B. And then anytime that you're writing interventions, so that's going to be in category B. And then category C is monitoring and evaluation. So essentially this is your follow-up. So you're reevaluating them. You're changing their treatment plan based on what issues they had. You're following up. Maybe they're sending you a message through your EMR, your electronic medical records. Maybe they send you an email. You're following up with them. Those are going to be category C. Maybe you're talking to them on the phone. They have questions about their supplements that you've recommended. All of that's going to be follow-up, category C. So I always get the question, oh, well, what if they send me more lab work and I'm assessing it? Okay, absolutely. If you're assessing something, it could count in category A. In my experience, most people have a harder time getting category C hours. So if they're sending you something that you're assessing later on down the line, and that's in a follow-up, it could be counted in A or C, but pay attention to where you're lacking hours and count it there. So if you're reassessing something, absolutely, it could be category A, but if you're lacking those category C hours, do it in category C if it's a follow-up. Okay, so let's see if there's any questions about hours here. Can you apply for a license in Virginia even though they don't require it? They don't actually have licensure in Virginia at all. So in Virginia, we have title protection. So you cannot call yourself a nutritionist until you get your CNS. You cannot call yourself a dietitian until you get an RD. So you can practice, but you can't call yourself a nutritionist. So there are several states that don't have licensure. California, for example, there's no licensure. Anyone can practice there. So it really just depends on what state you're in. Do you need to have liability insurance as a student to work with a supervisor? Yes, it is required that you and the supervisor have insurance. If you are unsure about where to find insurance, check with your supervisor or reach out to me. I've got a couple of resources. But I do know that there are several different companies that offer student insurance. And I believe it's like $25 a year. So it's very inexpensive, but yes, both of you will need to have insurance. That's a really great question. I have not been counting this prep in category A, but have absolutely done it. Is it okay to backtrack through and add hours? Yeah, prep for initial session counts for category A. If you can backtrack it, definitely do. And I absolutely recommend having that tracker open all the time and just putting things in every day. Historically, when people don't track every day, they're losing hours. So there's things that are happening that you're forgetting about. For example, you answer a phone call from a client, 15 minutes goes by, you don't put it on the tracker. That's, a quarter of an hour that you're missing. So, track those hours every day. We'll look at the tracker in just a second. If you've worked with them as a health coach pro bono informally in the past, and now you are following up, could it be follow-up hours if you've already assessed an intervention as a health coach earlier? Yes, but you would want to check with your supervisor. That's going to be your supervisor's choice, but I don't see why not. And it actually might be worth kind of reassessing them as, through the medical nutrition lens, and then counting that in category A hours, but it'd be up to the discretion of your supervisor, but I don't see why not. Can you let us know about student insurance options? If you send me Yasmin, if you send me an email, I don't have off the top of my head. I know TRMS is one that I used when I was a student, but there are other options out there. That one for sure was $25, but I think if you Google it, several come up, but let me know if you can't find any. I can send the list. That's the only one that comes to mind off the top of my head. In Canada, nutritionist is title protected for RDs only. Can you comment on this for Canadian CNS practitioners? I'm not positive. If you email me, Els, then I can put you in touch with some of the CNSs in Canada and we can find out what they're using as their title. CNS, Certified Nutrition Specialist, is trademarked, so you are allowed to call yourself that if you're a CNS, no matter what the title protection is in the state. So I believe most of them are probably calling themselves Certified Nutrition Specialists, functional nutritionists, things like that. But shoot me an email and I can connect you and with some folks in Canada, we can find out for sure. I'm not as familiar with the laws there. Okay. All right, so how do you find a supervisor? So we have a list at the BCNS. So if you shoot us an email, which I'll put the email in the chat at the end, you shoot us an email, we can send you a list of those that are already approved. We have them listed by state. Some of them have additional states where they're licensed, and I've tried to add an extra column there, but not everyone has submitted to me what states they're licensed in. So that don't take that as being the only state. Just because they're located there, it may not be the only state they're licensed in. But we have that list. It has about 120 people on it. Some of them are larger supervision programs, others are single supervisors. So depending on what you're looking for, some of the larger supervision programs do cost more, of course, but a lot of them offer kind of all the bells and whistles. So they offer business prep, they offer exam prep. Those things don't necessarily count per hours, but they offer them. So by the time you get done with your hours, you're ready to go into practice. So they help you build your website and those sort of things. But we do also have supervisors that are just seeing people based on how many clients they have that just charge an hourly rate. So there is a wide range of options there. You can also find a supervisor in a work setting. You just want to make sure that the supervisor is approved before you start getting hours. So if you work in a functional medicine clinic or you work for a chiropractor, there's options there where people can be approved as a supervisor. They do have to have a master's degree in nutrition. And if they are an MD or a doctor, an ND or a chiropractor, they have to also show continued education in nutrition. RDs can also be supervisors, but they do have to have a master's degree in nutrition. So if you have, there's a link on the website that talks about being approved as a supervisor, but if you have questions, just let me know. But there is the possibility of finding a supervisor in your work setting. You can network. There's also, mentor programs. So again, make sure that you have them approved as a supervisor before you start your hours. Because I have had people finish their entire 1,000 hours and not have their supervisor approved, and they had to redo it. So please do not start your hours till you know for sure your supervisor is approved. Supervision can happen in several different settings. Okay. So it could be a clinical setting, could be a community or institutional setting, home health care. It could be through an internship or residency, or any combination of those. All right. Sorry. Okay, so when can you start your supervision? Like I mentioned before, once you've started your program, you can start supervision. If you're still in the degree program, you're going to want to make sure you start with those indirect hours, especially if you do not have experience working with clients. And then, as I mentioned, we see people perform better on the exam when they have completed at least some of their hours. When you turn in your SPE, there's several documents. There'll be the supervisor approval application, which you will have filled out if they're a new supervisor before you start your hours. The supervisor submits a report, and then we have the actual tracker that you turn in, and there's a couple of tutorials online to go through those. So those are available on the website. Before I start an advocacy, I know we're close to time and we can go over, but I want to show the tracker before I do that. So let me bring that up here. So this is the tracker. You can download it from the website. Let me try to make it a bit bigger here. And so you'll want to download this as soon as you're starting your hours. You don't want to wait, because you want to make sure you're tracking everything. So there's several tabs. I'm not going to go through each of them, but essentially the summary tab is going to give you a breakdown of your hours. This auto populates from the tracker. So this is tracking your hours. So don't mess with the formulas because it's auto tracking. But as you put things in the blue tab, they're going to show up over here on this summary. So in the tracker, we're looking for details, but I'm not looking for, several paragraphs. It doesn't need to be a book, but we do want to know what you're doing. So you are going to want to record each client for each day per line. So if you see 4 or 5 clients in one day, you might have several lines for one date. That's absolutely fine. You're going to indicate, as the example show here, you're going to indicate when you did the, when you had the service, who you worked under. So if you have more than one supervisor, you can indicate that there. In the description, we're looking for details about, was it a follow-up? So F/U session is a follow-up session. If you were discussing a client initials are nice. You don't have to use them, but it's a good way for you to track, who you're accounting for in your tracker. So initials, you can, F or M for female or male, if that feels comfortable. Put their age, and then just put a couple details about what you did in the session. So line 6 is a great example. So, client initials SS, male 62. It's a follow-up session. You updated intervention, presented with constipation and poor appetite, discussed triggers of constipation, recommended increase in hydration, fiber, and motility supplement. So I don't have to have a ton of detail, but want to know what you did, with the time. For your practice name or facility, that could be your practice. It could be your supervisor's practice, just depending on what your situation is. You're going to indicate in column E if it's a direct hour. So most of them are going to be direct hours, but if it's an indirect or observational hour, you're going to indicate that in column F, because that's going to calculate to ensure you don't go over the 250 hours. E and F are separate than your A, B, and C categories. So if you have 3 hours of indirect experience, you're going to put it here, but you're also going to put it in the breakdown. So don't think you're double dipping if you put it in F and in the columns. This column F is just accounting for indirect hours. So we want to make sure that you don't go over 250. These 3 columns are going to be your A, B, and C, which we just talked through. So for example 7, this was an observational. So this person observed their initial consultation with their supervisor probably. It was 3 hours of indirect experience. 1.5 hours were category A, 1.5 hours were category B. So as you put hours into A, B, and C, it'll calculate on that front page. It'll also subtotal over here. We ask for the health conditions because some states want to see a wide variety of work done. So North Carolina, for example, requires that you have competency along several areas of nutrition. So if you're showing that you're only working with one condition, that's going to be a red flag for them. So make sure you're working with clients that, across the board with different conditions. Even if you plan on specializing in something, just make sure you're seeing a wide range of things in your supervision. All the hours are going to subtotal over here in column K. Column L is going to be time with your supervisor. So this, like I said, counts as direct, but doesn't fit into the categories. And then everything totals in category M. So there's a couple of tutorials online, and Tessa, I see your question there. I'll make sure y'all get the links to all of this. So make sure you watch the tutorials. And if you have questions about the tracker, let me know. I know it's a bit confusing and overwhelming to start with. There's also a self-evaluation tab. So this can be done throughout your work, or it can be done at the end. What we're asking you to do is evaluate yourself on the competencies. So earlier in the presentation, I was talking about the CNS competencies. That's what this is on this tab. So category, or in column A, these are the competencies we expect you to have experience in when you finish your CNS. And it might be minimal experience. So for example, something like eating disorders, you might have minimal experience in, and that's absolutely fine. But these are the things in this column that we're looking for. So it's great to have this tracker ahead of time to know what you're expected to know. And this correlates directly with the exam. Okay, so before I talk about advocacy, and in case anybody needs to drop off, is there any questions about, and Tessa, I'll grab the link for you all. Is there any questions about the tracker or about SPE? My SPE program does not require the PN form. Will that impact the qualification criteria to accept my hours? No, that's at the supervisor's discretion. So if your supervisor accepts it, a SOAP note or an ADIME or something instead, that's absolutely fine. The PN form, or the personalized nutrition data collection form, was created in case people didn't have those tools. But if your supervisor accepts something else, that's absolutely fine. That's at their discretion. Okay, let me I'm going to give you all the link to all of the forms. So everything that you will need will be on this page. So that'll be the tracker, that'll be the tutorials, it'll be the supervisor application. So let me grab that real quick before I move on. Okay, so everything you need will be on this link. Okay. Spreadsheet included on there. So it's called the CNS candidate SPE report. It's about halfway down. Okay, I'm going to keep going into advocacy, but if you need to drop off, I absolutely understand. And then I'll stick around to answer any state specific questions. Okay. Share my screen here again. There we go. Okay. So advocacy is important as a CNS, especially if you live in a state that requires a state license. At the ANA, our main principle of advocacy is that, as I mentioned before, all nutrition professionals should be able to practice their level of education and training. So when I'm doing advocacy work, I'm focusing on that, right? First and foremost are CNSs, but we believe everyone should be able to practice to their level of training. We currently work at the state and federal levels, and we're usually working on things like rules and regulatory processes and licensure. But our main goal is to create pathways to licensure for CNSs. So that's, besides certifications, that's the other area that I work in. Currently, of the 53 US jurisdictions, so that's the 50 states plus DC, Guam, and Puerto Rico, CNSs can practice in 46 of those. So the other 6, we are not allowed to practice in at all. So that you might hear them called the red states in discussion. So those are the states where CNSs are not able to practice. But of the 53 jurisdictions, 46 of them we are able to practice. There's currently 19 states that have licensure. So make sure you're touching base with me if you're not sure if your state requires licensure, so you're on the pathway to know that as a CNS. If you're in North Carolina or Florida, please reach out to me as soon as possible, and I'll put you in contact with our state mentors there. The licensure process, there's a little bit more difficult and requires a little bit of nuance. So we want you to know that in the beginning before you start your hours, so you'll be prepared for that. It's not anything that you can't do. It's just much easier if you know about it when you're earning your hours. So the few remaining states that we can't practice in or that don't have licensure laws, most of those are just outdated laws. And so we're actively working as we can to change that as possible. So there's a couple of different types of regulations. So exclusive scope states, most of those are going to be the licensed states. These are the ones that require a license to practice at least some part of some aspect of nutrition and dietetics. So those currently, are North Carolina, New Jersey, North Dakota. There's several, the 19 of them. If we are not able to practice through the license, a lot of them have exemptions or exceptions, and a lot of times that's how we're able to practice. There are still those 6 red states that we cannot practice in at all. There are also non-exclusive scope states, so these offer certification or title protection. So Virginia is a great example of that. Like I said, there's no licensure here, but there is title protection. And a lot of these, may not even have a board in place. So the licensure, like for example, in Pennsylvania, goes to the nursing board. So they don't have a dietetics board, it goes through a different board. So some, states are different. So just make sure you touch base with us so you'll know what those are. Arizona and Michigan were the only 2 states without any practice laws. Michigan just passed a law this last week, and it's going in front of the governor in the next couple of weeks. And there's currently a bill in Arizona. So before we know it, all states will have some sort of regulation. And a lot of that has to do with the registered dietitian compact. So if you're not familiar with that, the registered dietitians are creating a compact so they can have licensure across the 50 states. And so in order for that to be effective, they need licensure in all 50 states. So that's why those 2 last states kind of had some progress this last year. So if you're in either of those states, let me know and I can give you some more details. Here's just a kind of a snapshot of the ones on the left are states that we can get licenses in that are exclusive scope. The states on the right, Alaska, Connecticut, Massachusetts, we can get licenses in those states, but they're non-exclusive. So that means you don't have to have it to practice. So for example, in Connecticut, you don't have to have a license to practice, but you can get it. The benefit of getting the license is that you can then be paneled with insurance. So depending on what your practice model is when you become a CNS, that might be important. When I send the slides, there'll be a couple of links here. We have a guide to advocacy. We have on our website some action alerts for the states that have active legislation right now. So just reach out if you need more details on any of that. This email address on here is the best one to reach out for a supervisor list, any questions. So Brittany is my assistant. She's the one who answers those emails. So any questions that you have from today, you can follow up with her and I'll throw that in the chat too, so you can all just copy it. And then the other thing I'm going to throw in the chat real quick is the candidate Facebook group. So if you are on Facebook, it's a great place to meet other candidates and ask questions. I do have those office hours. Those are we announce those on the Facebook group. So it's a really great place to stay connected. So let me throw that in the chat as well. Okay. I see a bunch of specific state questions, so we'll see what we can get into here. And if I don't answer the question about your state, please follow up to the email address and we'll make sure